Good evening, everyone. I see we still have some people joining, so let's give them up to 6-5, then we can begin. Thank you.
Right. Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our first USSD webinar titled Unlocking the Power of USSD. If you can hear my voice, just raise your hand so I can confirm. If you can hear my voice, just click on raise so that we can know you're here. Okay, awesome. Everyone is here. Okay, right. We can begin. First off, Arkesel is a communications platform where we focus on bulk SMS, USSD, voice SMS, email marketing, and developer APIs, the reason why we are here. Today's session is to equip developers with the skills of how to create USSD applications. And then our host for today is Godwin Amethea, our managing director. So without much ado, I'll let Godwin take over so we can begin. Welcome once again, and thank you for making time to join us today. Thank you.
All right, Raymond, thank you for the introduction, and thank everyone on the call for making time for this webinar. So as Raymond said, the purpose of this webinar is to introduce developers to USSD application development. I'm sure we have different groups of developers. In this case, I'm referring to the level that they find themselves. Some are advanced developers, some are beginners, and some are intermediate. But then the goal is to introduce the developers, regardless of the level you find yourself in, to USSD application. I know there are some people on the call who have developed a number of USSD applications. There are some people also who are familiar with application development. They have experience developing fantastic applications, but this will be their first time when it comes to USSD applications. And then we have people who are now new to application development in general and want to learn how to develop USSD applications. And during the webinar, I explained what exactly a USSD application is. We've realized over time that it's confusing where when you say USSD application, people think it's a special type of application that requires some special skills to develop, but then that is not the case. Once you are familiar with any programming language and you know how API works, you have all the skills you need to develop what? A USSD application. So let me just briefly go over the services that Arkesel provides, as mentioned earlier by Raymond. So for all the services that you see here, we have an API for them, except for email marketing, what? Our email marketing service. So for our bulk SMS, we have an API for that. And then for the voice SMS as well. For those of you who probably do not know how voice SMS works or what it is, it's basically playing back a pre-recorded voice message or audio message to people. So the system calls the number, and when the person answers, it plays back the audio message to them. And we have an API for that where you provide your audio, the phone number, and the system does the rest. We have USSD, which is the focus of today's webinar. We also provide email marketing services, and then we also provide our OTP API service. Now, what the OTP or one-time password does is it provides an API that allows you to generate your one-time password and gets it sent to the user. So there are some parameters that you have to provide, and you can also do the verification. So as a developer, instead of having to maybe create the DB, work on your application, generate the code, set expiry, all of that. All you have to do is just call an API endpoint. The code is generated, sent to the user, and then when the user enters it in your application, you call the verification API as well. And this is available for SMS, that's one channel. Voice is also another channel. And we're introducing USSD very soon, where your users can dial a USSD code to have access to the OTP API. So now all of this, you don't have to worry, okay, I want to make SMS, voice, and USSD available for my users when it comes to OTP. We handle all of that for you. All you have to do is just call our API endpoint. So those are the proven services that Arkesel has been offering so far. If you haven't tried any of them, please do. And the documentation for all the ones I mentioned are available on our developer documentation website, which I'll show before this presentation ends. Now, this session is in two parts. First, the presentation, just to explain to you what USSD is, how it works, to help you better understand. And then the second part will be the coding session, where we'll build a simple USSD application. Now, we don't have much time for us to build complex applications. So we'll look at something simple and then explain to you the concepts behind it. So after this session, you can try it out and try to build something complex on your own. After the session, also, we'll conduct a survey to find out from you what you thought about the session, how it went, and maybe certain things that you'd expect to see in future sessions, because this is not going to be the only USSD webinar that will be hosting for developers. We want to have sessions where we get to a point where we have a lot more developers who know how to develop USSD applications and are doing that because of the benefits that USSD provides. One of them being people being able to access your application without an internet connection, which is one key benefit. So all of that will be explained as we go into the session. I've already spoken about the prerequisites. Once you have basic programming skills and you are familiar with APIs, you are good to go. So if you came into the session thinking, okay, I was going to learn something wild, don't worry, you already have the skills that you need to develop USSD applications. So when it comes to USSD applications and then the APIs that are provided, what you're able to do is you're able to develop real-time communication applications, right? So basically, there's communication between the user, which in this case is your user who has a mobile phone, and your application server. And in the next slide, I will explain how your application server comes in and why developing USSD applications is not too complex. Now, that's the first part, which is real-time. It happens instantly. So there's nothing like, okay, my user is not available, or you send an information and you have to wait, let's say 2, 3, 5 minutes. No, it has to be real time. Whatever the user needs access to, immediately they interact with the application, they should receive it. And it's two-way. Okay, that means that, okay, when you push to the user or when the user pulls from you, you have to give them something in return. So basically, I'm going over these features to help you understand what is capable with USSD. Any kind of application that will be developed for USSD will follow the same approach. It would involve real-time communication, and it will be a two-way communication. Now, what the main part that most of us are familiar with is interactive menus, where someone dials a code, for example, *928#, and then it presents a menu, and you are wondering, okay, how do I have a menu like that for showing? It will surprise you when I show you how that menu comes about and how simple it is to do. But for now, this is what you can do with USSD API. Once you have a use case that requires real-time communication between your application and then your end user, and it has to be two-way, meaning there will be information sharing across board from your application to the user and then from the user to you. USSD can handle that. So those are some of the API features. And again, I can't mention all of them in here, but this is just to give you a fair idea of what is possible. So I'm going to go into what USSD is, how it works, some of the protocols or the technologies that are involved in USSD. So the first part is, what does the acronym or USSD mean? So some of you, I'm sure, already know what it means, but it stands for Unstructured Supplementary Service Data. And why the unstructured? So later on, I explain the kind of information that is exchanged using USSD, but it's mainly text, right? And this text information that is shared between your application and then the mobile phone of the user is not structured. It doesn't have to be in any format. You can send text. So for us, it's text. You can send it in any way to your application users. Now, USSD is possible, unlike SMS. So SMS uses a mechanism that is known as store and forward. So if you want to send an SMS, you send an SMS using whichever gateway you want. It gets to an SMSC, which is handled by the mobile network operator. It first stores your message and then it forwards it, right? So that is when, if your phone is off or your phone is not available, out of coverage, the SMS still stores your message. And then once your phone registers on the network, it's able to deliver the message to you. But USSD is not like that, because USSD is real time. Once the phone is not available, or let's say your USSD application server is not available, that communication can happen. And the communication is basically exchange of information between two parties, right? It doesn't matter in which form it is. It could be something simple as a greeting message, and then the person replies. It's still communication. So as a developer, maybe what communication will mean to me between my application and my users will be different from yours. But so far as it means you sending some text information to the user and then the user sending a response back to you, and that can happen multiple times within a short period, then that qualifies for real-time communication. It's two-way communication, and it's something that you can do with with USSD. Now, that two-way communication being real-time is made possible, unlike the SMS that I mentioned, because the channel that USSD uses is the same channel that is used for a voice call. So you notice with a voice call, when you place a call and the person at the other end answers the call, once you speak, even though, yes, sometimes there's a small delay, the person at the other end hears you. When they speak back, you can hear them. So you notice there's this channel between you and then the person, and then you are exchanging information. So it's this same channel that is used by USSD. And there are some protocols that are involved that makes this possible. So I mentioned earlier on that it's the same channel for voice calls that is used. And there's a protocol known as SS7. So for those of you who are familiar with the telecom industry, you've probably heard about SS7, and that is the same protocol used for voice calls. Now, we might not be able to go into details how all of this works, but this is just to give you a fair idea of how some of these things happen in the back end. Now, you don't even need to know how all of this works as a developer to develop USSD applications, but then providing you with this background will probably better help you understand, maybe in case you have a challenge with your application, or probably you find yourself somewhere, or you are wondering how something works, you can remember, oh, okay, this is why maybe USSD is able to behave that way and why SMS doesn't. So that's for the SS7, and then there's a protocol that defines how USSD messages should be exchanged, their format and then their encoding, and that is the GSM 3.90. So there's a whole document that details, okay, the communication that happens within a USSD session. Again, if maybe you are interested, you can go and read on that. Is the GSM 3.90. So basically, existing voice channel made possible by SS7 is the same channel that is used for USSD, and then the GSM 3.90 defines how the messaging exchange for USSD happens, right? So someone, maybe not to assume everybody here knows what a USSD code is. I'll start with the USSD code, or how a user initiates a USSD session. So basically, on your phone or on your user's phone, from their keypad, anytime they dial, let's say a few numbers, let's say 928, and it starts with a star and ends with a hash, that is a USSD code. Now, for the USSD infrastructure, there are a number of components involved. The first one is your user's mobile phone. The second one, which is not shown in this diagram, is the mobile network operator. So in this case, it can be MTN, Vodafone, Glo, or Airtel Tigo. Then there's the USSD gateway, which is where Arkesel comes in, and then your application. Now, all these three things need to be in place for the USSD session to function, right? Now, earlier on, I mentioned, okay, when people say USSD application, they think some special skills is required for you to develop USSD application. No. So basically, what USSD does, or what USSD has enabled us to do, is to provide an additional interface to our applications. So the technology is there, which is USSD. The same way we have the voice technology, we have SMS technology. However, you don't need to develop, let's say, something that is based on the USSD technology. No, that is already there. All that it does is it helps you provide an interface to your application by providing that channel. And on your mobile phone, the phone knows when a user dials, let's say, star 928 hash, they are trying to initiate a USSD session. That request goes to the mobile network operator. They also have their systems. They know, okay, which gateway is responsible for this particular code. Then the request is sent to that gateway. So in this case, if it's the Arkesel gateway, then we check, okay, which client application is responsible for this particular USSD code, and the request is passed on to that particular application. So as I said, it's just an interface, it's nothing complex. The same way, depending on the type of application that you've developed in the past, for a web application, you decided you have your back end, you have your APIs, and then you've built your front end that communicates with the back end using API. So your application users make use of the interface or the front end through a web browser to interact with your application. It's the same way when you make use of USSD, you're just providing the users with an additional interface. That's how come maybe when you are developing, you don't worry about how the browser renders your HTML tags. That is not your problem. Yours is, okay, if I'm supposed to display something, this is the format it's supposed to be in. I've done it, and then I leave the rest to the web browser. Same for USSD. So basically, you are sending information, and then you leave the rest to the mobile network operators and then the mobile phone to handle the rest. So when you look at the flow over here, there's a phone where the user dials the code to initiate the USSD session, because it has to be real time and it's two-way. So once the person dials, it first hits the mobile network operator, hits the USSD gateway, then the request is sent to your application. And then your application sends a response to the gateway, it goes to the mobile network operator, and then it goes to the user's phone. So basically, the phone is going to display whatever your application sends back. So now back to USSD application not being complex, and then the USSD just being an interface. Once you have an existing application, as I mentioned earlier on, you are familiar with APIs, because you need to know how to develop APIs, or at least work with APIs to be able to communicate with the Arkesel USSD gateway. We know what an API is, an application programming interface, and it allows two systems to talk. So the same way we have a graphical user interface, which users of our application can interact with our system, we have an API, which allows two systems to talk. The Arkesel USSD gateway is a system. Your application is also a system. So the only way for the two of them to talk is through the use of an API. So I'll demonstrate how you can develop your API, which in this case will be your USSD application, what has been dubbed as a USSD application. But basically what you are doing is you are sending text response, and then that text response is displayed on the user screen, and if the user replies with an input, that input is sent back to your application. So the application logic, what you want to do if a user enters one, it's up to you. You can code it in any way you want, in any programming language you want. So far as you're able to develop an API, okay, based on the format that the Arkesel USSD API is in, you are good to go. So I think at this point, you've gotten a fair idea of what USSD is. So there's the technology, then there's your application, and then the technology allows you to provide an additional interface to your application. But all the hardware, all the logic depends on your application, and it's not dependent on the USSD technology. When I'm done with the first session, I'll pause just in case maybe you have any question, especially about this side on how USSD work, what the flow is. Please feel free to ask me. So there are a number of use cases, things that you can use USSD for, or USSD applications that we are familiar with. One of them is mobile banking, where most banks have a code that customers can dial to check their balance or do funds transfer. In this case, there is a core banking system. Without an existing system or without an existing application, you can't make use of USSD. It's just like maybe someone wants to develop a type of mobile application that requires functionality on a web server. If that server, which is supposed to provide the functionality, doesn't exist, you can't do much with the mobile application, unless of course everything resides on the client's mobile application and it doesn't need a server to function. But in this case, what we are doing is basically using the USSD to provide an interface for the banking system. The same way what the customer can do using USSD, they can do that from their internet banking application, and they can do that from their mobile application as well. So those are different interfaces that have been provided, where USSD being one of them. So I'm sure this example helps you better understand. We have mobile payments as well, where a user can initiate payment by dialing a code. We have voting and surveys. But basically, so far as you have an existing system and you want to provide an additional interface, you can use USSD. We've had people reach out to us asking, okay, I want to integrate payments into my application, or I want to do USSD payment. How do I do that? It's because maybe you've seen someone implement it, but you don't have an idea of how it works. It's not because, okay, the USSD has provided something complex or some format and say, okay, if you want to do USSD payment, these are the steps to follow. No. You can develop your own application in whatever language you want. Maybe you even have, let's say, APIs available that your mobile app interacts with and your front end also interact with. So it's that same API that the USSD will interact with, just that the format in which the input will come will be different. Because let's say for web, you can collect all the information at once, or from your mobile application. Let's say it's a form. You can ask the person to provide their name, their phone number, their email address, and then you submit it once to the API. But USSD is a bit different due to the limitation that we have. Okay, so sometimes it will be best to request for those inputs in stages. So the first time the request comes from the user, when they initiate it, you check, okay, is this a first session? And you see that example when we go to the coding session. Okay, it's a new session. Let me just display a text input. Please enter your name. And the person responds. It gets to you, okay, you store the name. Then, okay, after name, what next? I need phone number. It goes back. So you notice that in the end, we're able to collect all this information, but then the approach is different because of the limitation of what? Of the USSD technology. And there are a few things to note when developing USSD application. We know SMS is 160 characters, and once it goes beyond 160 characters, multiple pages are used to deliver the SMS message. Same with USSD technology, right? These technologies have been around for a while now. The maximum characters for USSD is 182 characters. So you can't go beyond that. If you send a response that is more than 182 characters, not all of it will be what will be displayed. Now, a USSD session has a maximum duration of 180 seconds, which is 3 minutes. So even though it provides that real-time interactive communication between the user and your application, they can't do something that will take them beyond what? Beyond 3 minutes. Once 3 minutes elapsed, the session will end, and the user has to start again. The second thing is that when a user initiates a session and after 30 seconds, there hasn't been any activity within that channel, the USSD session is terminated again. So maybe your application requires your user to input, let's say, a certain ID, maybe it's a student, and you require them to enter their index number or some ID, and the person, after dialing the code, realize, oh, I've forgotten, let me go and look for my card. It might take the person more than 30 seconds to look for their card and come and input it. By the time they are done, the 30 seconds would have elapsed. So the application will time out, and then they will have to dial the USSD code again. So even though USSD is great, it works so far as the user doesn't have an internet connection, unlike, let's say, maybe in the case of your mobile application where the user needs an internet connection. In the case of USSD, all you need is a stable internet connection between the Arkesel gateway and your server. It doesn't matter whether your users have internet or not. You can still collect the information you want, and that is how powerful USSD is. Mobile banking. Maybe the bank has a mobile banking app. It uses internet. You are somewhere where the internet is very poor, so you can't do much. You can't log into your internet banking platform. So you rely on USSD because when you dial the code and it gets to the mobile network operator, gets to the gateway, the internet connection most of the time between the gateway or between these servers are very good. Hardly will we go, okay, the connection is not good. So okay, regardless of the internet connection at your user's end, they will still be able to access your services. So these are some of the use cases, and each of these use cases have their own applications. So I have a voting system. There are different ways to vote. All I'm doing is just providing an additional interface using USSD. So we have different types of USSD codes. There's the dedicated, and then there's the USSD extension. So for USSD code, most of the time, these are used by large organizations. They don't want to share the number with anyone. So that code is unique to them. And then we have the USSD extension. Now, there are some dynamics involved in this USSD extension, but I won't go into details. I'll just end it at the level where, okay, for the USSD extension, unlike the dedicated code where you dial *928#, with the extension, you are appending an additional data, in this case 343, where that 343 is also mapped to a different application. It could be maybe within the same organization. Maybe it could even be, let's say, a bank. However, they know when you dial maybe *928*45, you want to use let's say the funds transfer application. Maybe when you dial a different one, you want to connect to the investment system, and maybe these are two different systems. So you could have an extension, but then they map to different applications, or maybe even internally, it all goes to one place. And then now that application checks, okay, what code came in? Okay, this has to go to this particular application. This has to go to the other application. Usually the dedicated codes are expensive to set up. And depending on your use case, the dedicated might not be the best approach for you. So you go with an extension, and as you go in your news changes, you can go and get a dedicated code. Now, for the live session, there are two tools that we'll be making use of as developers to help us debug. And this is also based on feedback that we've gotten from some people that have used our APIs. Maybe you are aware of some of these tools, maybe you are not aware. But then the first one is Postman, which you use to test, document your APIs, develop your APIs. And then we have Ngrok, which basically allows you to access your local host or your local machine on the internet. Now, the reason why we are going to use these two tools, Postman having to do with APIs and Ngrok having to do with accessing your local machine on the internet, is that for Postman, as I said, we are dealing with APIs here. And once you know how to develop an API, you are good to go. Communication between the Arkesel gateway and your system will be through APIs. Now, let's assume you've developed your API. How do you test your API? That is where Postman comes in. There are other tools, other similar tools that you can use, but the purpose of this demonstration, I'll use Postman. So it is good to use Postman to test your API even before you go ahead and then try to download the code. What some people do is they've written the code and they think, okay, maybe my code should work as expected. They get the code and then they provide what is called a callback URL, which when we start the process, you see. So once they provide the callback URL, based on the flow that we saw earlier on, the user initiates the session, it goes through the entire process, and we say, okay, it is this application that is responsible, pass the request. Now it gets to the application, maybe there's a syntax error. Now, because there's a syntax error, the response that we are expecting doesn't come in the expected format. So that cannot be shown to you. So now at that point, you are wondering, okay, is it coming from the gateway? Is it coming from an application? You're not too sure. But then you can avoid all of this by using what? Postman, where before you even try to download the code, you'd have used Postman to test your APIs, different scenarios to see how it works. Then we have Nginx, as I mentioned, allows you to access your local machine on the internet. So now Arkesel Gateway will require that, okay, whatever callback URL you provide or whatever URL, which basically telling the Arkesel Gateway that when someone wants to interact with my application through the USSD interface, channel all their requests to this URL, which in this case is your API endpoint. So maybe in the past, you've been using APIs, but then the service provider provides you with their endpoint, like our SMS. We give you our SMS API endpoint. But in this case, you are giving us your API endpoint, which is your callback URL for your USSD application. And then you send us the response, which is displayed to the user. So now when you've done the first part where you've tested with Postman, the next thing is for you to what? To test again locally instead of before moving into a production environment, because locally you have access to debugging tools. You can watch logs. It is easier to make changes here and there and see if it works. But maybe on a production server, probably you don't even have direct access. You are using some deployment pipeline. So even if there's an issue on it, you can't debug. But once you have access to it locally, you can check your logs. You can put some stops here and there and see what is causing my application not to function. So the main purpose of these tools and services is to help us debug our USSD applications very easily, and then we'll see them in action. So this gives you an overview of what USSD is, what the technology is about, what the flow is, and then some of the tools and services that we'll be using for our testing. Now, Arkesel's API documentation is available at developers.arkesel.com. You can also visit our website as part of the menu, or you can reach out to our support team and ask them you want access to the developer documentation, and they'll gladly share it with you. So I'm going to pause here for questions. And then after that, we can move on to the next session where we try our hands on a few applications and see all the things that we've looked at in action. All right, thank you. So Raymond, you can take some questions.
Okay. If anyone has any questions, kindly raise your hand and then we can accept the request. So any questions, kindly raise your hand.
Raymond, I see 2 hands up. Okay, all right. Ben, please, you can go ahead.
Okay, so we'll take John first. Can you unmute yourself?
Oh yeah. Hello.
Yes, hi, we can hear you.
Okay. Good evening to everyone.
Good evening.
Yes, so I'll just want to find out the recordings. How can we access the recording of today's lesson? Yeah, I just want to find out about that.
We'll make it available on YouTube.
Oh, okay. Okay. So probably okay, all right then. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Right. Okay, so Cephas can go now. Hello. Hi, Cephas.
Cephas, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. I came in quite late, but first of all, just like to commend you for what you're actually doing now. I'm a big fan of Arkesel because I've been using your SMS for quite most of my projects actually. But recently I jumped onto your USSD. It's quite a straightforward thing to do. But then there's one challenge that I know it's quite too early to ask this question, but probably I'd like to mention it now before we get deeper maybe in the development stage. But I tried using your USSDs for a voting for voting something. So, but the challenge I had with the USSD is after someone select a contestant, whatever, then I receive everything back with my callback URL. I was actually trying to integrate it with another payment solution, a payment API. So what was supposed to happen is this: in total, I'm supposed to get like 2 different callbacks. So before trying to integrate the payment option, I was using just a USSD. So I get whatever the person select, then I get a callback, which now goes back handles for my back end, where I can now receive all of the person's information into a particular DB. But in relation to the payment, I just had issues from beginning to end. So at the end of it, I couldn't use Arkesel, your USSD again. First of all, I want to find out, do you guys have your own payment solution?
Okay, all right. So, Cephas, thank you for your question. And no, we don't have our own payment solution yet. We are working on that. And then I think based the challenge that you've explained, I think I have a fair idea where that might be coming from, and there are ways to go about it. So I'll just touch on it briefly here. So maybe you can try it out again and see if that approach works for you. So, I mentioned that USSD has a restriction, just as SMS. Arkesel doesn't decide that, yes. So there's a total session duration of 180 seconds. And then within 30 seconds, if there's no activity, it times out. So now what happens is that in case you're interacting with other APIs, and there's a delayed response from them, and then the response comes in after the 30 seconds, that means that you'll not be able to send the response back to your user. So usually, when you want to integrate payment, what you do is that you collect all the information that you need from your user first. And then once you collect from the user, you can decide to queue it or store it somewhere. And then tell the user that, okay, you've received their details and that they should expect a prompt. Because when it comes to USSD, it will be difficult for you to do web checkout. So you are doing direct mobile money payment. So what you do is you have their phone number, which already came in through the USSD session, and then any other details you need from them, like the amount. So you queue it and send a response to the user. So at that point, you've gone around the 30 seconds limit. And then in the back end, you can now make the call to the payments API. So now even if the payment API goes and you are waiting for the response from the user, because you send a request to the payment API, it goes to the mobile network operator, the prompt is sent to the user has to confirm, callback is sent. So you realize that entire process takes more than 30 seconds. So definitely your USSD application will time out. But once you send the response to the user first and you do all of this in the background, what happens is that eventually when you receive the callback that the payment is successful, you send an SMS to the user. So that's how you usually go around it when you want to integrate payment or any other external API, which you expect a callback from them into an application making use of USSD.
Okay, and thank you very much. But the funny thing is, the solution you just gave was the same solution I was using. So what I was doing was, once the whole thing starts, all right, once the whole thing starts, I just to get my first callback, I keep all of information into a particular DB, okay, into a particular table. Then once that is also successful, I get another callback to the payment API. You get my point? that was actually okay. The solution you give at the latter part is and that is for me to use SMS as a confirmation for them is what I didn't actually think loud on. So I'll try and implement that and maybe get back to you guys via your customer side and just let you know whether it was successful or not. But all the same, based on how I know your SMS, I used the USSD tool before without what's the name without payments, and it was very okay. It was very successful for me. I'll just advise if you guys can actually go in for payment solution as well. Trust me, you never know who will be jumping in, because I'm actually waiting for you guys to start your payment solution. Currently using Paystack.
I know people are waiting, but it takes a lot of effort. Want to get it done right. So we are still working on it, and I think once we make progress with it, we'll let our customers know.
Okay. Okay.
Right.
Thank
and
you
please,
very much.
once you try it out and you need any assistance, just reach out to our support team, and someone will assist you with it in case you run into any other challenges.
Sure. That's fine. That's fine. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay. Elvis. Okay, so Elvis, you can unmute yourself. Hi, Elvis. Good evening. Hello. Okay. Fred can take over.
Fred, please unmute yourself.
Hello, Fred.
Okay, hello. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm surprised today. Why surprise? I'm saying this because a year by now, some time ago, I called your support team through the service numbers. I was interested in the use of the OTP, but I was being told that I have to do it myself because you've not gotten there. Today, I was surprised to see the OTP as part of your presentation. I don't know whether it's something that you are now introducing, but then the main thing I want to find out is the demo you'll be doing from here. Will you touch on the OTP?
No, unfortunately, no, we may touch this mainly for USSD, but we might have other sessions that focus on our other services. And the the OTP was introduced not too long ago, so I'm sure that's why they said it wasn't available.
Okay, but is it working now?
Yes, please, it does. But we have the.
If it is working, can we have a documentation online so that at least we can try something?
Yes, the documentation is available. When you go to developers.arkesel.com, you have access to the documentation. You can also visit our website and click on Developers API. It will send you to the documentation.
Okay. Because even though you will not be making a presentation on it today, I will have wished that from tomorrow I make a trial.
No problem.
To see how it is now. Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay. So I think Ben has had his hands raised for a while.
Can I try again if I'm audible?
Okay, all right, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was saying that my use case is mostly in the northern region where internet access is a challenge. So most of the time, people have to fill service and then go to where they can get internet before we get the feedback. I just want to find out if I understand the presentation so far, if the USSD will help to solve this problem, as in even when they don't have internet, can they fill service, submit them, and then we'll get them real time? In which case, yes. I think the network will help us get those data. Just want to be clear on that.
Yes, so that's exactly it. So you can do that with the USSD.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Hello, Ben. Please go ahead.
Hello?
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah,
Hi, Ben.
Yes. Yeah, so I usually build all our applications with PHP using the Laravel framework. You get it. So the good thing about Laravel is it gives us a lot of, there's a lot of support and documentation and all. So I wanted to implement the USSD. I work with an organization that, we do training for the doctors and the nurses, and we want them to be able to check their CPD points and access some, vital information, even though they don't have internet, because simplicity is the key factor in our line of business. However, I'm unable to test it because there's no testing platform. Like, there's no way. You have to buy the USSD code in order for you to test how the application works. Meaning that during the time of the testing, if you're unable to use the application, let me put it in that sense. So I think testing, there should be a way for you to buy the USSD. And if it's sessions that we are going to buy, we can buy the sessions and say 10 cities or 20 cities for that testing period. Then we can subscribe to a specific package. But I didn't see that at that moment. I wanted to find out if some had been made available or still in the process.
Okay. So before I answer Ben's question, I see we have a few more hands coming up, but I think we can take John's. If John hasn't spoken, we can take John's question and then go into the session, that's the coding session, which I'm sure most people will be interested in. And when we are done, we can take the rest of the questions. So back to Ben's question. So I understand where you are coming from, and that's what I mentioned. I'll walk you through how to use Postman and Ngrok for the testing. So you don't even need to purchase the USSD extension to even do your testing and then your debugging. Now, we've realized this is a challenge for developers, and what we have worked on, we have the first version of it, which is our USSD simulator, which is available on the Play Store. It's not available on iOS yet. The idea is to help you test your USSD application even before you purchase an extension. So you simulate if there are errors, you're able to fix all of that. So for now, what you propose, we don't have it yet, but then the ways around it is to test with Postman and also to use the USSD simulator that we have available.
Okay.
I think John has left the call. So since Yusuf is the only one, okay, Yusuf, please go ahead, and then we can move on to the next session.
Okay, please, I hope I can be heard.
Yes, we can hear you.
So I want to add something to the guys. So I've used your USSD service before, and then one thing I realized is when you are using the USSD simulator, the results that you get is a bit different from, so like the testing environment and then the production environment have some differences. So maybe you can check that and then work on it. And then also I don't know if maybe that will be done in the coding session, but I wanted to know about the timeout sessions, resuming sessions, because I had issues with people trying to use it, and then maybe because of network issues, they were not able to complete it. And when they try to do it again, like there are sort of duplicates and other things. So maybe if you can answer that for me, I think that'll be all for now.
So thank you very much for your feedback. So we take a look at the USSD simulator and see if there's an issue there. And then anytime you have a challenge, just reach out to our support team. So in this case, they could check and see if maybe where the issue is coming from and then have this free. So for the timeouts, it will depend on a number of factors. So as I mentioned, the 30 seconds, 180 seconds, we can't do much about it, which I'm sure you've experienced. But now you have situations where maybe someone starts an application, gets to a point, maybe they didn't input something in time. Unfortunately, the scope of this session won't allow us, but one of the things that people do is that when they keep track of the sessions, right, maybe locally in your system. So when you notice a session comes in again with the same phone number, you notice that, okay, probably the user is trying to continue. So what you do is to track where the user got to previously and ask the user to continue from there, right? But maybe in subsequent webinars, we can explain exactly how to do this. But then I'm sure this gives you a fair idea of how you can go around the timeout issue and then users being able to continue from where they left. But the good thing is that it's the same phone number they'll be using. And you can define that, okay, if a user does my code within maybe a 3 minutes or a 5-minute window and they got somewhere, I can just ask them, do you want to continue, yes or no? If they say yes, then you continue from where they left, or if they say no, then you start the session all over.
All right, okay.
Thank you. All right, so we'll move on to the coding session. It won't be too long. As I said, a lot of the work depends on your application and not the USSD. So I've set up an environment. I'm going to share my entire screen with you so you see how we go about it. I hope you can see my screen. Raymond, can you help me?
Yes, we can
Yes,
see you.
sure.
yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to be using a number of things, and then one of them, I'm going to be using PHP for this particular demonstration. Okay, so I've created a project on my local machine. I've created an index.php file that says echo hello world. So I'll just demonstrate how this looks like and how intro comes in, and then how now it works with the USSD and how the APIs comes in. So this is a basic application, and most of the time when you are being introduced to programming, you find hello worlds in there. Good. So now let's say I type localhost / USSD webinar, right? It says hello world. It's on my local machine, but now how do I access this thing externally, right? Just to confirm, it's the same thing. It's hello world. Okay. Now I need people to be able to have access to this, and that is where maybe when I'm developing a USSD application, I'll need a callback. How do I do this? So I mentioned the service, which is Indra. I won't go into details on how to set it up, but then they have an easy to use documentation. Just download, install it, and this is a screen that you see. So you download the application, you unzip it, you configure it using the token. So once you follow all of that, the next thing you have to do is to start the HTTP tunnel. So basically, the same way USSD creates a tunnel between the end user's phone and then your application, Ngrok is going to create a tunnel from their server to your server. That's your local server running locally. So you can access it as though it was on the internet, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run, this is the command that they proposed, but my setup is different. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run it. And then in this case, you can decide which port you want it to run on. My local host is already running on port 80. So once I run, this is a screen that you see. So you can use HTTPS, you can use HTTP. So basically what it's doing is that it has mapped this URL, which it has generated automatically for me. So it's a subdomain on injrog.io that is mapped to my local host on port 80. And then same for HTTPS. So assuming, and this does not only apply to Arkesel's API, assuming you are developing an application and you need to test a callback from an API and you are wondering, okay, how do I do that? Because I know sometimes it could be challenging testing callbacks because you are not too sure, okay, they've told you you should provide an address we can reach. But then you think, okay, I only have to do it on the server. But now when you do it on the server and then it comes to you, are wondering, okay, if there was an error, how do I tell there was an error? You can easily use Ngrok for this. So it's mapped it to my local machine. And all I have to do is just copy this URL, go to my browser and do /USSD-webinar because that's the folder it's in. It depends on your setup, but at least this gives you a fair idea. And you see, it says here, hello world. If I go back and then I change it to whatever it is, that's the same thing. And what you can see is that I'll paste this in the chat session. So anyone, let me do that. So if you are to enter this URL on your machine right now, you're going to see the same screen. So that's just to demonstrate how you can easily have access to your local environment for testing purposes. without having to deploy towards a production environment. So that first step is done. Now let's go to USSD development. So we'll start with the Arkesel API documentation. So all our documentations are available over here. So as I mentioned, you can go to the website, click on developers. It sends you to our API. So the gentleman was asking about the one-time password. So we have the documentation for the one-time password over here. We have the documentation for the voice SMS. And then we have the USSD. So for the USSD, it gives you an overview why USSD is preferred, how it works. And then it explains to you what goes on. So I'll just quickly go over this again. So what happens is that Arkesel will initiate a request with a new session with a value set to true, okay, to the URL that you provided during your setup. Now, what will happen is that if it wasn't a new session, it's not a new session, meaning we already sent you a request. You sent us a response asking the user to input something, and then we sent you a request again. When that second request is coming or subsequent request is coming, it will come with what? New session false. So then it now depends on your application to handle that. What do I want to do if it's not what? The new session. Now, in the same way, when you are returning, you need to tell the gateway, okay, I am done. If I am done, then I can set continuous session to what? To false. If I'm not done and I expect some input from the user, I set continuous session to true. So these are just parameters that you have to provide when interacting with the USSD gateway for us to know whether you're expecting more input from your user or not. And you can play around with this. So you notice that for those who have tried it out, or when you are trying it out, you notice that in your response, if you set continuous session to false, the user won't see the reply button. There's no input. But when you set continuous session to true, then they will see an input field and then the option to either cancel or reply, depending on the phone that they are using. But basically, that is how it works. We send you the session data and then you send a response to us. Nothing complex. Okay. So those are some of the things that you can do with it. We have sample codes that you can use. So we have PHP, we have Laravel, we have .NET. So if we have the sample PHP code on GitHub that you can try out and see how it works. Now for the API reference, now how do we get started? Okay. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, you can develop the USSD application without purchasing the code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate that first without purchasing the code, and I'll come back and then explain to you how you can get the extension. So in this case, ideally, you require an Arkesel account, and then you require your endpoint URL, which for our development purposes, we've solved using Ngrok, so the Arkesel USSD gateway can reach you. Now, there are a few things to note. As I said, API to API communication, those are two systems. And if you are familiar with APIs, which is the prerequisite, there's an endpoint, there's a request method, there's a response format. Okay, so, okay, what is the request method? How is the data going to get to me? And even in what format is the data going to get to me? So for all data exchange, we use the JSON format. Okay, and that will also mean that you have to set the appropriate headers when you are sending a response. What we've noticed is that sometimes people send a response, even though the body is in JSON, the response header is text. So then the application sees it as text and is not able to extract the appropriate information from the response that you have sent, and that is your application is sending, to be able to display the right input to the user. So those are some of the errors. So sometimes when you are developing and you notice that error, it will be good to check your response header, because the structure will look like JSON, but then the content is different, right? So how do we receive a request? Now, basically, once you purchase a code with Arkesel and provide it with a callback URL, which in this case is your application endpoint, the entry point into your application. An example is if it's a web application and it's, let's say it's a PHP application, the entry point is what is index.php. You need to provide an entry point into your application. So you can decide your callback URL either ends maybe as what I have over here. It's just maybe USSD-webinar, or you can even include the file, maybe something.php or something.jsp. It's all up to you. You decide, but you need to provide an entry point into your application. Now, what happens is that when the gateway is sending you that information or that request, it's going to send a payload. So this is the payload sample. So we provided the request samples on the right. right? And over here is going to be post, and there's USSD endpoint URL. It's your application endpoint URL. Now, the USSD gateway is going to send you this data in JSON format. Basically, that is it. It sends you this in JSON format, and then you respond with this in JSON. Okay, once you're able to get this dynamic, this flow, you can build any complex USSD interface for your application. Just that maybe depending on the scenario you find yourself in, maybe there might be ways to navigate it. But aside that, that is all that you need to know. So because we mentioned a session, there's a channel, there needs to be a session ID so you can track. Okay, this is the session we are doing. We do it at our end. The operators also do it at our end. So we pass this session ID to you. And then you have your user ID, which is what you have with Arkesel. And this is the new session I was talking about. So what happens is that because it is the same entry point for your application, we need to be able to tell you whether this data you are getting is new or it is existing. Because if we don't give you that information, your application might interpret it wrongly. If it's a web application and maybe the person visits the URL the first time, maybe you display a login page. However, if maybe the person has already logged in, maybe you redirect the person by checking, okay, has this person logged in? And that's something similar you can do with the new session parameter. So here we have the explanation for the body that you receive from us, what the session ID is, the data format. So this is generated by the USSD server to identify the request. Now, in a valid session, and then what will happen is that the session ID values in the subsequent request messages will remain the same, okay, until the session expires, either because the 180 seconds was exhausted or no input was received within 30 seconds. And then this is what Arkesel provides. We have the new session, which indicates whether an incoming request is an initiating new one or not. Then you have the MSISDN, which is the phone number of the user dialing the code. So most of the time when you are interacting with users via USSD, there's no point asking them for a phone number. If the phone number they are using is the number you want to use, you can get that data from the MSISDN. And then the user data is what they dialed on their phone. Now, when they are initiating it the first time, they have to dial either the code or the extension. So in this example, it's *928*1#. That is what we send to you, right? In subsequent, so when it goes and you respond, and the user has to enter something, and the user has to enter 2. When the data is coming back, it's coming back with 2. If you ask the user to enter their name, when the response is coming back, it's coming back with their name. So the challenge will be how to handle your application flow, your application logic, to be able to deal with this data as they come in. So then maybe you store it. Okay, is it the same session? If it's the same session, what is this session for? Things like that. That is where the gentleman gave an example. Maybe someone started the process. They provided first name, last name, but then they're supposed to provide, let's say, an ID card number, which they don't remember. They have to go and look for the ID card. By the time they come back, session has timed out. They dial again. Now, what do I do in that instance? Do I ask the person to continue? So then that is when your application logic comes in. But you notice that in developing a USSD application, it's mainly just your application developed in any language of your choice that has an API that basically receives requests from the Arkesel gateway in this format, and then you send us a response in this format. Okay. And then you have the network. So it tells you whether this request is coming from Airtel, Tigo, it's coming from MTN, or it's coming from Vodafone or Glo. Then you send us the response back. So when you are sending us the response back, you need to indicate the session ID, because for there are multiple sessions that have been opened, multiple tunnels. Even to your application, you could have 5 user tunnels open to your application. So you need to respond with the correct session ID, so we know which user to route your response to. And then also you need to include your Arkesel user ID that was passed the first time. And you also need to include the phone number. So in as much as you are adding the session ID, you need to include the phone number as well. Then this is where the magic, I'll put it, happens, where you provide the message you want to display. So when you dial a USSD code and you see what we call a USSD menu, it's just basically a text message that has been presented in that format. So sometimes people think, oh, maybe there's some application or there's some way to go and design the menu. No, it's just you saying, okay, I am designing the menu to help my users. Because of the nature of USSD, if you don't guide your users, they might not know what to do, because I dial a code and I'm wondering, do I dial 1 or do I dial 2? Imagine you are using MTN's mobile money service and you dial *170#, you know it is Momo, but you're wondering what to do next. How do I check my balance? It's just the menu that guides you that, oh, when you want to check your balance, press 1. Now, in your application, you know when the person press 1 after their initial session, that means they want to check their balance. So then you handle the application logic like that. When you receive 2, in this case, which will be the user data, you handle it like that. Maybe when you receive 2, you want to provide an additional USSD menu. So basically, that is the flow, and that is what we are going to use for the demonstration today. Just keep in mind, it's nothing complex. It's just the payload coming to you, and then you sending the response. We have a sample PHP code here. So I'm going to use that sample PHP code. I'm going to copy the PHP code and paste it in my IDE what we're working with. So I'll clear this and then paste it here and then save it. Okay. Now, when I go back and run this, it's showing me errors and all of that. So what I'll do is, those are warning errors, so I can turn those off because it's going to affect my output, because I need it to be in a certain format, which is JSON. Because once the text goes and the other things in it, the gateway can't interpret it properly. So this is how your response should look like. Now, ideally, it should not be in a browser. We use Postman to demonstrate this, but this is just to explain to you how I'm still able to access my local development using the URL that Njoc has provided to me, right? And you notice that anytime I do a request, it tracks my HTTP request over here and what I did, right? So there's been another request. So that is to start with. So now let's see what this code that we've pasted here means. So basically, as I mentioned earlier on, let me go back here to the documentation. And we go to the payload. The USSD gateway is going to send this data, which is in JSON format, to your application. That's the body. There's nothing else like, oh, maybe there's a parameter. No. The body comes in JSON format in this way. So what we are doing here is we are getting the JSON content. Right? And what we do is we use JSON decode to decode it, and then we get into an array and we're able to access the element. And this is one way of doing it. Depending on the programming language you do, you implement the code and extract, or you have maybe a library that makes it easier for you. That is up to you. But the most important thing is you've gotten the data, you've done the decoding, and you're able to extract the information that was given to you. Now, one of the things that you'd want to do as a check is to check if the user data is equal to this. It could happen that maybe you have different extensions or different things that your application handles. So you want to avoid the situation, and it's your entry point is the same. So you want to avoid the situation where someone does *928*303#, someone also does 304#. They all go to the entry point and they're supposed to do something differently, which your application is not able to handle. So it starts throwing errors. So it's a good thing for you to handle. So what we are doing here is to check if the session is new, right? Because we realize, okay, if the session is new, then maybe we need to show the person a menu. Because if we don't show them a menu, they won't know they have to enter 2, right, to buy a bundle, or 1 to check their balance. So you notice that it's just basically a bunch of if and else that is in here that makes up what we call the USSD application. So I check if it's a new session, which is coming from the gateway, and this is my application extension on my USSD code. Then send this to the user. And as I said, it is text. So you notice what we are doing here was we defined the first variable, which was message, and then we assigned welcome to Arkesel Bank. And then we appended the new line character to it. So this is new line, this is new line. And what we did here was we came to append this to our original one using the dot and equal to sign. So this is for readability. We could have just done this, and it will still work. Sorry. Yeah, we could have just done this and it will still work anyways. But then maybe to help you easily read the code, that is why this was done. So when you see a long code, you dial *170#, you see for transfer, press 1, non-Momo user. Basically, that is what is happening in there. It's just text that have been formatted that way for you. Now, because it's new and we want the person to give us an input, we set the continuous session to true. So this block of code will execute the first time when the person dials the code. So all this will be skipped. And then what? We have to now send our response back to the gateway, which we said needs to be in this format, right? And again, in JSON. So first we create our array, we have the data in here. So this is our response. And then we encode our response here. But before we do that, we do what? We set our content type to application JSON. This is where some people will clear this and save and run and say, oh, I've done everything it's supposed to work. Yes, but we're expecting JSON from you, or the API expecting JSON from you. So if you've sent a text, the content header needs to match, and then you add the HTTP response code, which is what, 200, meaning okay, everything was okay. And basically that is it. So this has walked you through the sample application flow for you to see how it works. Now I'm going to look at how we can use Postman to debug an application like this. So let me open Postman. So this is a new Postman environment. So I'm going to change my request type from get to post. And I'm supposed to enter my URL. So my URL is localhost/USSD-webinar. Okay. Now, when I'm done and I want to test, even with the Ngrok URL, I can do the same thing, but it will be faster. I don't have to leave my machine, go through a tunnel and come back. So that's what I'm going to do, right? Let's assume I do this. I don't send anything and I hit send. Let's see what happens. Session ID is null, user ID is null, MSISDN is null, and the message is what? Invalid input. Continue session false. Now let's see where the invalid input is coming from. So you notice in our block of code, after it does all of this, now we check, was there a new session? Does it match our USSD extension? We check, maybe it didn't match. Okay, it wasn't a new session. Maybe it's an existing session. Now, if it was an existing session, when new session was set to false, did the user enter 1? No. Did the user enter 2? No. And we only know we're asking the user to enter 1 and 2. So where did the input come from? We don't know how to handle this. So we send a message. It's just similar to handling, let's say, exceptions within your application. In case something should go wrong, you either log it or handle the exception and tell the user, okay, something went wrong. So this is one way of handling an exception where someone sends you an input that you're not expecting. So that is what we have over here, giving us this. But now how do I simulate? I know the gateway is going to send me this payload. So I copy this payload, go to Postman, then I go to my request body. Okay. And then instead of saying none form data, I select raw because that's the format in which the gateway is sending it. I paste the data here, and then I change the input type from text to JSON because it's going to come in JSON. You notice when it was text, the rendering was different. So now it's JSON. Now let's hit send again. So let's see what happens. So now we've done session. Okay, so now we have *9281 here, hash here. And then our code is looking for what? *928*303 hash. So again, we didn't find anything, invalid input. So it's either I change this, assuming I know the code I'm going to buy is 303 hash. I change this to 303 hash and send, right? So again, invalid input. Then I come here. What I have here is *928*303 hash. So let's go. And then now let's check again what we have. So this is what? New session. We have the MSISDN, and then you have this. So now, assuming you are running into an issue like this, okay, what we do is that I want to first check, is it hitting my server? Which I know very well it is hitting over here because I'm getting what? A response. Now, why is it not executing what? My code? Is it because of what? The user data. So that is when maybe you can decide, okay, let me output what my user data is over here, or probably I even just exit or die, whichever way you want to go about it, and then you send. So you notice that my user data is not getting to my what? My application, right? So then that is when, okay, you go and decode and see, okay, now the data that is even coming in from, how do you call it? Yeah, is it working or not? So let's try this and see, okay, are we decoding? So this is just to walk you through some of the things that you experience, because now, assuming you don't do all of this and you just buy the code and assume, okay, I've written my code, it should work fine. So you notice that how do you call it? So it gets here and it's not working, right? So let me try this. Let me do index.php and let's send and see. So you see where the issue was coming from. So even though my entry point was index.php, it wasn't hitting what that index point. And you notice that immediately I fixed that, I was able to get my array input. My array input, which I'm printing out online 10. So that is basically ways to debug your USSD application. So now let me clear this from here, save it, go back, and then I hit again. So you see now we're getting the session ID, we're getting the user ID, and we're getting everything. Now let's assume I change this back to 301 and hit send. It will give me invalid input. So that will mean that I have to come and change this to 301 and hit send. So once I do, it says welcome to Arkesel. Now in Postman, it won't show the actual new line, it will just show the characters. But when the user sees it on their phone, they're going to see the new line, characters. Let's assume we make a mistake. Let's remove this semicolon, we save. Yes, it's showing an error, but let's see what happens when we hit. So you notice over here, it will give me the syntax error. Now I'll demonstrate how you might not see that error if you just went straight to testing it with the USSD extension. So now we've seen how this application works. So let me go back and say this is okay. I sent. This is the first one. Now someone will go like, okay, now I've done the first one. How do I simulate the second session? The only thing is that for the subsequent sessions, new session becomes false. And then the user data is whatever the user entered. So now we are saying 1, check balance, 2, buy bundle. So if we want to simulate the user entering 2, I enter 2. The MSISDN is the same, session ID is the same, user ID is the same, network is the same. The only thing that has changed is it's no longer a new session and the user input has changed. And this here is what the Arkesel USSD gateway is sending to you. So I hit send and it says no packages available for subscription. Let's go and check. Do we have anything like that? Yes, that's what we have over here. New session is false, user data is true. What do? We say message, no packages available for subscription. Do we want to continue session? No, false. It ends there. So that is just basically it. All we've done is to write a PHP code that accepts text input, goes through our logic, and sends message back. Only thing is that the message has to be in this format, and then you pass it the session ID, user ID, MSISD, and message, and the continuous session, right? So we've done, and what we've seen so far is a way to debug our applications locally without even purchasing a USSD code and making sure that the response is okay. So again, one way to confirm if you're using Postman or whatever tool you're using, just go and check the headers and check the content type. If it's not application JSON, then you have to fix it. So that is one other thing. Once we are done with this, we've tested it's working, we are ready to buy a USSD extension and try our application. So you head to your Arkesel application, which is here. So when you have an account with Arkesel, you go to the accounts dashboard. When you log in and you go to the account dashboard, this is what you are presented with. Okay. So once you click on USSD, it sends you straight to this particular page where you purchase a USSD plan. So you can go through and see which extensions are available. So in this case, let's do something random. Let me see if 567 is available. I check availability, it's already in use. So let me do, let's say 989. Okay, so 989 is available. So I decided to purchase 989 for, let's say, 1 month. So it's okay, first Arkesel USSD webinar. So you have to provide details of what your application does in here. You can decide to subscribe for a number of months, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, or 6 months, but I'm going to leave it at 1 month and I'm going to go ahead and pay. I have enough balance in this particular account for that. The pricing for the different extensions also displayed over here. So, and then you have the live chat here to reach out to our support team. So our support team is available on weekdays from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. and then on Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. So I pay now and I have my, it's okay. The text is, we need more information. So this first USSD webinar to train developers. Yeah, so that should be enough text for us. We've purchased the extension, which is 989. So what I do is I hit manage. And then it brings me here. So this is where I have my endpoint URL. Okay, now let's assume I do this. I know in Postman it works. I go and copy this URL and paste it. We know it won't go anywhere, but let's try. So I do http :// and then I save it. I think everything should work. And it shows me my current endpoint. Now let's see what happens when I try to dial this code from a mobile phone. So I'm going to share an application screen with you. Just a moment. Sure, let's see. I'm trying to connect to my phone and then share my screen with you. Okay, so I'm assuming you can all see my phone screen here. So the extension
Yes.
we purchased, okay, great. So the extension that we purchased is *928 *989 hash. So let me do *928 *989 hash and hit send and see what happens. So usually we give this, sorry. Let me start again. I thought I was showing you the screen. So we have *928 *989 hash and we hit send. So since there's an issue with the external application, please contact the service provider, because again, the callback URL cannot be reached. Okay, so now what do? We need to update this, and all I have to do is just check if my ngrok URL is still valid. It's still valid, so I copy it, come in here, and then update it. So I just have to add the index.php to it, and then update it. And once I update, let's go back here and dial *98 *928 *989 hash and hit send. So what are we getting? Invalid input. Do you know why? Because we've purchased an extension 989 hash and our code is saying what? 301 hash. So what do I need to do? I change it to 989. I save it. Go back. Let's dial the code again. So *928 *989 hash and hit send. So it comes, welcome to Arkesel Bank. 1, check balance. 2, buy bundle. You notice how the response here does not have the new line characters. It just shows us 1, check balance. 2, buy bundle. So that is why I say the magic happens. So you see this and you think, oh, some magic was done somewhere. It's just basically text input that is being displayed. So if the user is to respond with 2 and hit send, what do we say? It will say no packages available for subscription. Now you notice that over here, we didn't have the option to cancel or reply, because in our code, we're returning continuous session is equal to false. Now, the very first one we are doing continuous session is equal to true, because we want the user to give us an input. So let's try again, *928 *989 hash. It gives us an input, cancel and send. Now I'm going to cancel, and let's see what happens when I change this continuous session in this code block to false. So basically what I'm saying is that I am not expecting anything from the user. Our session has ended. You see, welcome to Arkesel Bank, check balance, 2 buy bundle. Continuous session is false, so the user can't do anything because the application said this is the end of the session. So those are some of the few things to take note of. And once the user enters an input, it goes back to your application. So if we decide we want to add a third one, okay, so let me copy this code block. Let me copy this, paste it here, and say 3. So we're expecting option 3. That means I have to go and add it to my message here saying 3, what do we want it to read? We want it to read webinar. Okay. And because I want the new line to show, now let me save it and let's see what happens. Okay. Let's see what happens when without the new line character. So let's go back here. You see how it looks like. Check balance, buy bundle, no space, nothing, new line, 3. So that is why you have to make it interactive or easier for the users to navigate. So that's what the main purpose of a USSD menu is. It's just like you have your web application or you have your mobile application and you design the menus the way you want or where you want to put them. That is what up to you. Right, so let's go back here and go and add our new line character here. And we change this false to true because we're expecting an input from the user. So when we get here, we change this message to webinar demo message, and we save. So we go back here with *928*989# and we hit enter. So we have now webinar appearing on a new line. We have our input field activated again. So we enter 3 and we hit send. So the message is displayed down here, webinar demo message. So basically, that is what happens when you develop a USSD application. Now let's make a mistake. Let's take this off, right? Yes, PHP is throwing an error. We are not going to use Postman. We're just going to go ahead with let's assume we've uploaded our application to the server. We dial *928 again, and then we dial 989#. There's an issue with the external application. So usually people see this message and think, oh, it's coming from the gateway or something. So it means that there's an issue with your application. Now I can go to Postman and run it again and see. So this is my PHP error. So once I see this PHP error, which I won't see here, I can go back and fix that error. When I come to Postman, Postman shows me the response in the format in which it's supposed to be in. Then I can go back, dial *928*989#, hit send, and it shows me my USSD menu. So basically, that is the process you go through to develop a USSD application. So right now the session has been created. If I wait longer than 30 seconds and then I dial, it's going to show an error because it doesn't even get to my application anyway. So I'm going to leave this on for a while and then keep talking. So we have the session, we have the mobile network operator, we have the gateway, and then we have your application. But all the other 3 people are doing, including the phone, are just creating a session which allows you to receive this text data and then send back a response. You notice in all the response that you sent, the only thing that got to the user was the message parameter. And the only thing that you received from the user was the user data. So what got to the user was this message parameter. And what you are receiving from the user in the form of input is the user data. And that is what most of the time you'll be concerned about, because within that session ID, user ID, network, MSISDN, it won't change. The only thing is that first session is new session true, subsequent ones, new session is false, and that is all. So unfortunately, it's 7:30. We're hoping we'll be done by 7:30, but then at least we've been able to finish the session at this time. And let's go back. I'm sure now it's past 30 seconds, and let's reply with 3 and see what I will tell us webinar demo. Okay, so our session was still active. That means that we've not gotten to that time period yet. So next time we probably just have to track. But once you go beyond that time frame, then it will throw an error, session timeout, or it gives you some other kind of error. But then even though we waited for a while, we still send it within our 30 seconds time limit. And you can check, these are standards that are out there. So you can just go and check, okay, what's the average duration of a USSD session? What's the maximum number of characters to have? And then talking about maximum number of characters, this is a tip. So when you realize that your menu goes beyond the maximum number of characters allowed, that is when you notice some applications for their third menu will have this, say enter hash, enter hash for next menu. So basically what they are going to do is when the person dials and it's not a new session, and let's say it's an existing session. So what they're going to do is they're going to do this and say, okay, if the input is hash, then just display what? The subsequent menu. So they build a new menu again. So as I said, these are some of the things that we can look at in an advanced session as to how some of the USSD applications you've interacted with handle things like this. But thank you very much. We send a survey to you and then we take a few questions and end the session. All right, thank you. Raymond, we can go ahead with the questions.
Okay, great session. I'm sure we've all learned a lot. So if you have any questions after this presentation, just raise your hand and then we can take a few questions before we round up. Okay, see we have a few hands up. Prosper. So Prosper, you can unmute yourself and then ask your questions.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Hello, I'm from Congo. Excuse me, we're a French-speaking country. My English is not very good, but I wanted to ask a question. Do you cover also DRC or do you have just specific country?
Okay, so for now, our USSD service is only that only works in Ghana, but then we are working on other countries, not in the immediate future, but then in the near future, we are considering other African countries.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, right. Okay, so Ifrifa, you can unmute yourself and then ask your question. Hi, Ifrifa. Okay. Samuel can unmute yourself and then ask a question.
Hello.
Yes. Hi, Ifrifa. You're here.
That's why.
Okay.
Okay, so my question is, today was the day I have been using your service like for SMS, but today
Right.
I've been selling massive results checkers so I have people who have a USSD service. Basically, I have no knowledge of programming, so I contacted the support team to tell them maybe if they could assist if there's a way that you have a development team, because even if I learn PHP language, I can try and learn, but I just wanted help, and because of that I couldn't get anything in the section. Because I'm sure you get me at point. Because I don't have any technical. I can do the tech if I sit down to learn, but I wanted help with the development.
Okay, so if I get where you are coming from, so what we do, our core is to provide the technologies and then the APIs. So when someone reaches out to us and needs assistance, usually we refer them to our API documentation. Maybe when you run into any specific errors, you let us know. But in the case where you need us to develop the application for you, so that is different. And based on the needs, we can either see if we have our developers available to do that, or we can see if we can connect you with someone who can do that. So I think what you can do is just let the support team know that, okay, what you're actually looking for is a developer to do the development for you, and that's what you want, but not just to buy the code and do the development at your end. Then we can take a look at your requirement. In this case, you've mentioned it's a WASI checker, so we want to know maybe do you have an existing system? How are you going to get connect to the third-party systems your USSD application will interact with, and then we can take it from there.
Okay, thank you. I think I did that, but that's the support team sent me this meeting.
Yeah, so I think what you did was, I think they assumed you're a developer who needed help to develop the application, which is not something we do. So it's either we can guide you in a few instances, maybe you're having errors with the API, but then if maybe you're a developer and you're now new to development and you want us to guide you through the entire process, we are unable to do that. But however, if you want to outsource the entire development, that's where I said we can look at it and probably maybe get a partner who can help you. So I'm sure that they didn't get maybe your requirements right, but just get back to them with the specifics that you are looking for someone who can develop the application for you.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. Okay, Ima can unmute yourself and then ask your question. Hi, Ima. Okay, Angelo can unmute yourself and then ask your question.
Hello.
Yes, hi.
Yes, this is Ima.
Okay, Ima. So you can ask your question now.
Yes. Actually I joined late. But my request is the training session. Can we get a video for some of us who were late to the session, the training session?
Yes, these sessions will be uploaded on YouTube on our page. So just key in Arkesel and then the title, Unlocking the Power of USSD for Developers, and then you get the video.
Okay, I think I have actually used the messaging one in my PHP application, which I've developed myself, but USSD, I think I've not done anything of that nature before. Probably I will try and see how best I'll be able to use it. For me, I really like the platform, so
thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Ben can unmute yourself and then ask your question. Hi, Ben.
No, please, it's not Ben. Angelo,
Okay, Angelo. So you can ask your question now.
Initially, can I proceed?
Hello, you're breaking up.
All right.
Hello.
Okay. Please, I missed some. Hello.
Yes. Hi. Okay. Please hold on.
All right.
Or okay, please hold on. If you have a question and you can't raise your hand or you can't speak or facing network problems, you can type it in the chat box and then I will read it out. You can type it in the chat box and I'll read it out. So you can leave all your questions in the chat box.
All right.
Okay, so you can go ahead. You can go ahead, Angelo.
All right. So please, I wanted to ask. I missed out on some session, and when I came, I saw it was written in PHP, the application. I'm a Java developer, and I want to know if I can use Java to write USSD application.
Yes, you can do that. So maybe when you watch the session again, I mentioned that the core thing here is the response you are sending and in what format. That's all. And then you handling the input that is being sent. But it doesn't matter what application you are using. You can use any application. Once you go to a developer documentation and it says, okay, the input needs to come in, the input you're receiving will be in JSON and these are the parameters. You just have to write it in that language to handle the input. And we say when you are sending a response back to us, it needs to be in JSON. These are the parameters and the values you need to include. The content header need to be, the header for the content type needs to be JSON. That's all. Once you set it, you are good to go. It doesn't matter what programming language you have.
All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, Samuel can unmute yourself and then ask your questions.
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Samuel.
Okay, thank you. I think mine has to do with the user's response. So for instance, if, let's say the menu that we are having, the user is supposed to select the first, so I'm having, let's say, 3 pages that the user is supposed to go to. The user selects one the first time. So we are going to keep that session. The user goes to the next one and also say dial 1. Then the third one too, the user dials 1 again. How will I be able to track that this particular one belongs to this, maybe the second step that I need to do something with? Or I don't know if it's making sense. Like, I feel like I'm getting confused with that section.
I get you and understand where the confusion is coming from. So yes, there's a way to handle that, but then unfortunately, time won't permit us for me to demonstrate that you could have done that because we'll have to store the data. But just to give you an overview, you track the inputs that are coming in and then the previous steps. So one easy way to do that is for the session, you track the steps. That okay, previous step, the person entered 1. Maybe step 1, step 2, step 3. So once you're able to handle that logic in your application, any input that the person enters, you have to go and check, okay, what was their previous step? And for that reason, they've entered this new step. Then you can use your application logic, either using a bunch of if, switch cases, whichever one works for you. And then you make reference to maybe a function somewhere, depending on how complicated your application is. But then the good thing or what you have to do is to track the user steps for that session in a DB, in a file, or whatever works for you.
Okay. I think I'm okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so we have one question in the comments from Jonadab. He's asking, what are some of the security concerns around USSD applications since we are dealing with plain text here? This is essential when dealing with sensitive data such as passwords, pins, etc.
Right, so that's a good question. So what happens is usually we recommend your callback URL needs to be HTTPS because all the connection between the users, the user all the way to the gateway is what is encrypted in the sense that USSD doesn't go, the sessions do not even go over normal HTTP. Okay, so up until the gateway is all secure. Now, between the gateway and your application is where you need to ensure you secure it by making use of HTTPS. So that's the first one. Another thing that you can do to ensure security, where maybe someone knows your callback URL and just doesn't send you requests as I was simulating using Postman, is to what? Is to check the IP address the request is coming from. So, okay, Arkesel, I want to whitelist the IP. So that is one thing. So you know that, okay, any USSD request that is going to come in is going to come in from what? This particular what IP address from Arkesel. So those are the few things that you can do when you are dealing with what sensitive data. And it doesn't even have to be do with sensitive data. If you can do it from the very beginning, just do that.
Okay, so we have Jonadab, I hope your question has been answered.
Yes, I've gotten my answer.
Okay, awesome. So we have another question from Jude that he wants to know if we provide mobile money payment APIs and what are the terms and conditions.
So Jude, we don't yet. Very soon we'll have the payment API. We know a lot of people have been asking us for this, but we need to make sure we have the right documentation, the right certifications to be able to go in for a license to do that. So we are still working on that, but at the moment we don't.
Okay, so we have a few hands up. And if you have any questions, you can leave them in the chat box and then I will read them. So Elvis, you can unmute yourself and then ask your question.
Yeah, this is on a lighter note. So
Okay.
I realize Arkesel has a YouTube channel, few subscribers, maybe just to show our appreciation. Most of us can subscribe. And then those asking about the recordings will also be able to get a prompt as and when they upload the videos. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I will leave the link in the chat box so that you can all subscribe to our YouTube platform. Okay, thank you. So Ben can unmute yourself and then.
Yeah, so I wanted to find out, just to top up with what Afrifa Akwesi said, it would have been nice to have, first of all, like to have a group where, developers can join, or a small community where people can join. And, sometimes we get responses from the developers on your side, but when we talk to our peers who are on the forefront, it's sometimes a bit easier and communication is faster than the back and forth we usually join. And secondly, I wanted to find out how the error responses are being handled. Are we supposed to specify the error responses in our code and then output it to the user, or the error responses are being sent depending on the request that is being sent from our server? Is your gateway handles the error response and then sends it to the user? That's what I wanted to find out.
Right, thank you. For the errors, because we're expecting the response to be in JSON and to have certain parameters in a specific format, once it doesn't come in that format, the gateway sees it as an error. Okay, but then if, let's say in this case, your application has a specific error, for example, what we have, which is invalid input, then that means that you have to do the work to let your user know, okay, this is an error. But if it is not intentional, where you want your user to know, maybe you are validating, you ask them to enter an email address, and the email address they entered is not in a valid format, and you want to send them an error message, then that will mean that you'd have to debug your application using other means. One of them is using Postman to see why your application is not returning the appropriate response and then fix it.
Okay. I think that's and the the chat thing or the group thing where a community or something. Is something that is already available that we can join, like a WhatsApp group or the
it's not
Telegram group or something.
All right, so it's currently not available. We'll look into it, and then also, since it's come up, we'll reach out to the developers that we have already on our platform, the people that join the call, and find out, okay, if we are to create a channel like that, which medium will work? Is it WhatsApp, Slack, and Telegram, and see maybe which ones most people prefer, and then we'll do that. Or we can even have multiple options. So thank you for the feedback, and we'll work on it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Right. Any more questions? If you have a question, just raise your hand and then unmute yourself.
So okay, we have a question.
Okay, so Patrick, you can unmute yourself and ask a question.
Good evening.
Good evening,
Good
Patrick.
evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening. Okay, thank you very much for, taking us through this very process. I think what's pertinent from my side to ask is regarding perhaps deploying USSD. So I see that from your side, you are offering the USSD as a service to developers to integrate. But if you are looking at it from the perspective of you deploying that USSD code and some code, how maybe, I don't know, maybe there's no part of what you seek to offer training on, but then if it's possible that in a future session we can have that, and we should appreciate that. I don't know whether my question is clear.
Yeah, so just to clarify, so you want a session to cover deployment of your already developed USSD app to a production environment?
Yes, I don't know whether that's part of the plan. Yes.
Not really. We can consider, but it's, as I mentioned earlier on, the USSD application is just similar to developing your own application. So whichever way you handle your deployment, you can do that. All you need to do is that wherever you deploy it to, there is a way to reach that application, either using a URL or an IP address, which you can provide as the callback. So that's all. If it means maybe you decide to continue to use Ngrok and have your machine on all the time, that is fine. If you want to use any of the cloud service providers, DigitalOcean, AWS, that's up to you. But it's something that we can probably take note of and maybe just cover it briefly in one of the future sessions.
Very well. Very well. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, Ima, you can unmute yourself and ask a question.
Hello.
Yes, hi.
Okay. This is not related to today's presentation, but yes. So I'm not fully into the development. This is something that I do on my own. I mean, all the APIs that I've used so far from your application or from your platform, it's just something that I've developed on my own, which I even have a client who is using it. So my request is, do you have any intention for maybe any beginner like me who has who is not employed into that area, maybe as you get some project we want to maybe outsource to beginners like us who can assist in developing some of those applications so that we can also enhance our programming knowledge?
So for now, we don't have any program like that. Maybe we'll see if it's something we can do or not. But what you can do in the interim, if you are a beginner and you want to develop your skills, you can come up with your own projects to try your hands on. If it's, let's say, USSD, for example, maybe you come across a USSD application, maybe it's a ticket sales application, and you ask yourself, okay, how do I build something like that? So you can decide to just practice. So the more applications that you work on, the more experience you get, because this will have like different scenarios that you have to handle within your USSD application. So that is something that you can start doing now to improve upon your skills. And then when you do, and you have any challenges, that's where the developer communities will be helpful. And if it's USSD and you have a specific challenge, you can reach out to our support team to assist you.
Okay, just a quick one. Yes, I've developed a series of applications, but as I said, I don't have any client who is using, and how to even market my service is an issue. Probably you are having the bigger platform. I mean, in case I'm now using the Laravel side. I've done the PHP and I'm now into Laravel also using it. So I think the current application that I use, the messaging for, or the text messaging for is Laravel application. So maybe in case someone maybe needed very not in a larger scale, maybe you can probably reach out to some of us who can maybe do those ones, not like.
I think I get you now. So what you can do is just send our support team an email and mention that, okay, you're a developer, and in case someone should reach out to us and say they need someone to develop a USSD application and it's something simple, maybe we can consider you for that project.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think that's not bad. I think that's not bad. But I'd also wanted to add that I actually logged into my Arkesel platform now. I wanted to see the USSD packages, the USSD extensions over there, and I realized it's rates per network. I would want to find out why. What if I don't want for just Vodafone? I don't want for just Tigo. I just want to find out the do's and don'ts with the subscription I want to buy. I just want for empty and exclusively or something. Is this something that is being done, or is what you get buy is what you get?
So unfortunately, it's not per network. The pricing is just there to give you a fair idea of how we arrive at the total cost. But then if you are purchasing, it has to be for all extensions, all networks.
Okay. That's cool.
Okay. Thank you so much for making time to join us today. And the gentleman who asked the question about wanting a project, I think Ifrifa has extended to help, so you can contact him. He has left his number in the chat box, and then you can connect with him. Right. Many more questions. Okay.
I think we can take the last question from
the last question for now, and then we'll round up. Our time is almost up. Okay. Then thank you so much, guys, for making time to join us today. We will share a feedback survey with you. Please try to be open. Yes.
Get the hand up.
Oh, really? No, I think he has already spoken. Or Kof, Ano, have you already spoken?
No, I haven't. Good evening, everybody.
So sorry. Good evening, Kof. Please go ahead with your question.
Okay, so I was about to wonder, would you ignore my questions twice, because I was the first to type my question in the chat at the beginning, asking about your USSD accessibility in other countries. But I think within the session, there has been an answer for that for the foreigner who asked that question. Okay, so I've been using your services for quite some time now. This is not really a question. I fell on Arkesel when some of the other bulk SMS were making life for developers very terrible. I will not mention names because of ethic purposes. So let's move forward. So number two, you said the USSD platform has a sandbox. So can you please indicate where we can have access to the sandbox so we can play around it before subscribing to that to the service? So basically that's my distance. But thank you so much for the session.
And
I must commend what you do. And then secondly, one thing I was impressed with on your platform is the speed of delivery of SMS, which is very, very, very important for developers as well. So kudos, thank you for the session. Thank you for demystifying USSD for everybody. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your contribution, and then accept our apologies for the mix-up. Okay, so
to answer your question, so we don't have a sandbox, a specific sandbox for USSD application. What we've done is to provide ways which you can test the application using existing tools. So one of them is using Postman to test if the API comes in the format that is expected, or you can use any other similar tool. What we've done is to also develop a simulator, but again, the simulator will be limited. The simulator is supposed to provide some additional details beyond what you will get from a normal USSD response. So I've shared the URL. It's currently only available on Android, and that will mean that again you have to make use of Indrog, or you have to be on the same network as your local machine to be able to use our simulator. But then the sandbox environment will have to be your local environment, and then you try to connect to the API using any of these tools. Right. Thank you.
All right.
Wow,
Thank
just
you
a minute. You know, earlier, before the beginning of the session of having developers who are, some are quite very good, some are moderate, some are beginners, and all that. Some too have clients who they keep getting clients, and they do some. Is there some form of a referral program? Where something. I just want to find out. Want to know all the options available to us as developers, both beginners, in the middle, and then advanced, that we get a client and we roll them onto, because as of now most of my clients are all enrolled in Arkesel. I use them for the SMS. Unfortunately, I don't use the OTP because I hard code it and I send the OTP myself, but they all use it. So the more I recommend, do I is it a referral package or some discounts I'm entitled to or something? I just want to find out.
So we don't have a referral program in place. but then it's something that is in the pipeline where you get there's an incentive for referring people to Arkesel. So that's something that most likely before the year ends. I know it will sound like it's very far away, but then it could happen sooner. But it's something that we are working on. Okay, so someone is asking if there are any freebies for developers who made time to join this session. We can look at that, probably give out some free SMS, and that will mean that the it's like, but anyway, that would mean that it would have to be, but we'll discuss it, and probably maybe even if not this session, even if not this session, maybe the other session, but that would mean that will have to be the, what's the name? The Arkesel account email will be the same email, but it's been noted.
Okay. This will be sooner. This will be sooner. Okay. Right. Thank you guys for making time to join us. The details of the next webinar will be shared through email and an SMS as always. Please share with your developer friends. We need more guests to learn more about how to develop USSD apps. So thank you very much, and then see you next time.
Right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.